Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? It started with a sound, just a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakably real. One night, in the dead of winter, when the wind howled outside and the warmth of the fire flickered weakly against the encroaching cold, Lisa heard it. She'd been alone, the house silent except for the faint crackling of the logs in the fireplace. But there it was, a whisper. It wasn't a voice she recognized. It wasn't her imagination. She could feel it, like a cold breath on the back of her neck, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Lisa sat up in bed, heart pounding. The house groaned with the weight of the storm outside, but there was something else, something more insidious. The whisper didn't stop. It grew louder, more distinct, as if it was closing in, creeping closer to her, inch by inch. A chill swept over her, though the fire should have kept the room warm. "Help me." The voice was faint, barely a whisper, but it echoed in her mind. She froze. Who was that? Who could it be? She was alone in the house. Her husband, David, was supposed to be home hours ago. She had tried calling him several times, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She had convinced herself it was just the wind, or perhaps the creaks of an old house settling. But now, the whisper was unmistakable. Her gaze darted around the room. Nothing seemed out of place. The antique furniture, the curtains fluttering ever so slightly in the draft, the shadows stretching across the walls, it all looked normal. But then she noticed something that made her stomach twist in horror. The door to the attic was slightly ajar. It wasn't like that when she had gone to bed. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move. The whisper seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if it was calling her name now. Lisa, her skin prickled with fear. She had always felt uneasy in this house, but it had never felt this wrong before. The house was old, over a century old, and though it had been passed down through generations of her family, she had never felt a connection to it. It was a place filled with secrets. Secrets she hadn't wanted to uncover, but now it felt like those secrets were clawing their way out. The attic door creaked open just a little more. A gust of wind whistled through the narrow hallway, but the door didn't close. No, it stood wide open, as if inviting her to step inside. The whisper grew louder. It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a cacophony of voices, all murmuring indistinctly, some desperate, others soothing. But all of them, they wanted something from her. Lisa hesitated. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone, but there was no signal. The storm had knocked out the power lines. She couldn't call for help, couldn't rely on anyone. And though she tried to reason with herself, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was calling her, whatever was whispering from the attic, had been waiting for this moment. Slowly, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet meeting the cold floor. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to stay put, but her legs carried her forward. Drawn to the attic door, she had no choice but to go. As she crossed the hallway, the whispering grew louder, the voices blending into a singular chant. The door was now wide open. She could see the darkness of the attic stairs, a pitch, black hole at the top of the landing. There was something waiting there. She could feel it, like a presence that reached out and gripped her soul with an icy hand. Lisa took a deep breath, swallowing the rising tide of panic in her throat. She didn't want to go up there. She didn't want to face whatever was behind that door, but the whispers were too powerful, too insistent. They were pulling her in, urging her forward. She stepped onto the first creaky stair, the wood groaning beneath her weight. A shiver ran down her spine as she moved upward, one step at a time, as if the darkness of the attic itself was reaching up to claim her. Halfway up, the whispers suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It pressed in on her from all sides, suffocating her, making her feel like she was drowning in it. The air in the attic felt colder now, unnaturally so. She could see her breath in front of her, even though the fire was still burning downstairs. And then, a voice. So close, it was as if it was right beside her, whispering directly into her ear, spoke her name again. Liza. Her heart skipped a beat. She spun around, her pulse racing. There was nothing behind her, only the darkness pressing in from the corners of the house. She glanced down at the bottom of the stairs, but there was no one there. No one to hear her, no one to help her. Just her, alone in this old, suffocating house. The attic door creaked open, as if to beckon her inside. For a moment, Lisa thought of running, of fleeing back to the safety of the bed, of pretending that nothing had happened, that it was all just her mind playing tricks on her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the door wouldn't stay open forever. That something, someone, needed her to go up there. She needed to see it for herself, to understand what was happening. With trembling hands, she took the final step into the attic. The door slammed shut behind her. The room was pitch black, but she could make out the shapes of old furniture, forgotten relics of a time long past. There was an old rocking chair in the corner, its seat worn and faded with age. A dusty trunk sat against the far wall, its brass lock tarnished with time. But in the middle of the room, there was something else. A large ancient mirror, its surface cracked and obscured by layers of grime. She didn't know why, but something about that mirror drew her in. It was as though it was calling to her, whispering her name in the same voice that had been haunting her all night. With a shaky breath, she took a step toward it. The room seemed to grow colder still, the air thick with an oppressive weight. The whispers were gone now, replaced by a strange, eerie silence. Lisa reached out and wiped away the grime on the mirror's surface. As the dust fell away, the reflection that stared back at her wasn't hers. It was a face she didn't recognize, pale, gaunt, and twisted in agony. The eyes were dark, hollow voids, as if they had been sucked out of the very soul. The figure in the mirror seemed to be moving, its lips forming words that Lisa couldn't hear, though she could see them forming in the glass. "Help me." The words appeared in the mirror, as if they were being written by an unseen hand. Lisa staggered back, her breath coming in short gasps. The figure in the mirror didn't move, but its eyes, they followed her. Every step she took, they were locked on her. And then, just as she was about to turn and flee, something in the attic creaked. A slow, deliberate sound, like the shifting of heavy furniture. Her blood ran cold. Something was moving in the shadows. She spun around, but the attic was still empty, the silence suffocating. Something was there. Something watching her. The whispering began again. This time louder, more frantic. And in that moment, Lisa knew the house had been waiting for her. Waiting for her to uncover its darkest secret. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't understand, was that the house had never been empty. It was never just the wind, never just her imagination. The house had always been alive. And it was hungry. Lisa's heart was pounding so fiercely in her chest she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. Her breath came in shallow, frantic gasps. The mirror, that damn mirror, was still reflecting that thing, its hollow eyes staring back at her like a promise of doom. Her legs were frozen to the spot, unable to move. Paralyzed by a fear she had never known before. It wasn't the mirror that was the problem. No, it was what was behind her. She could feel it like a presence, thick and oppressive, wrapping around her chest. She had no idea what was waiting for her, but she could sense its eyes, its many eyes, fixed on her. Her hands trembled violently as she tried to reach for the door, but the mirror was still pulling her in, forcing her to look into its depths. Her mind screamed at her to move, to run, but her body betrayed her, locked in place by an unseen force. The air around her grew thick, heavy, suffocating. Every inch of her body was telling her to turn and flee, but her feet wouldn't budge. The whispering started again, faint at first like a soft wind, but growing louder, more insistent. "Help me." The voice was unmistakable. It was the same voice she had heard earlier, calling to her from the darkness. It wasn't just a voice now, though. It was a thing, something that had taken shape in her mind, twisting her thoughts, suffocating her in an unrelenting haze of terror. "Lissa." The voice was closer now, as if it was right behind her, breathing down her neck. She could feel the warmth of its breath, a heavy exhalation that felt wrong in the freezing air. "Help me." Suddenly, the mirror shifted. For a brief moment, the reflection that stared back at her wasn't the twisted figure anymore. It was David, her husband, his face pale, eyes wide and full of fear. His lips trembled as he mouthed the words she had heard in her head, "Help me." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't understand it. She had seen him just hours ago, laughing and talking about a work trip he'd had to attend. He hadn't seemed upset, hadn't shown any signs of danger. But there he was, in the mirror. And then, as quickly as the image appeared, it flickered out, replaced by the dark figure once again. Her mind raced. How could this be? What was going on? David was out there somewhere, wasn't he? Surely he had to be. There was no way he could be trapped inside the mirror, or, worse, dead. That thought was too horrifying to entertain. The whispering voices swirled around her, becoming a cacophony of pleas, of desperate cries. "Help me! Help me! Lisa!" She spun around to face the attic. The shadows seemed to shift, as if something was looking within them. Something that had been waiting for her all this time. The air was colder now, colder than before. It was as if the walls themselves were exhaling the chill of death. The floorboards creaked underfoot, groaning with age and weight. Something was moving in the corner of her eye. Her pulse quickened. She reached toward the door again, finally forcing her legs to move. But as she took one step toward it, the door slammed shut. No escape. Her heart raced. She turned back toward the mirror, hoping, praying that it would give her some clue, some direction. But as her eyes met the reflection, she saw something that made her blood run cold behind her, just past her shoulder. A figure was standing in the shadows of the attic. It was tall, far too tall. The figure was cloaked in a tattered black robe, its face obscured by a deep hood. It didn't move, but its presence, filled the room like 1,000 storms. Lisa's legs trembled, her breathing erratic. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the figure. It was watching her, studying her, its silence more terrifying than any scream. Lisa. It wasn't the same voice as before. This was different, low, deep, almost a growl. It seemed to come from every direction at once. The whispering died down, as if the voices knew their time had passed, as if they too feared the thing that had just arrived. Lisa's blood ran cold. She was caught, trapped, between the mirror and the presence in the shadows. And for a moment, it was as though everything in the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The figure in the corner didn't move, but its presence intensified, like an invisible hand slowly closing around her throat. Lisa gasped, choking on the cold, choking on the fear. She had to move, had to do something, but her body was frozen. And then, in the mirror, she saw it. The thing behind her wasn't a shadow anymore. It had moved. It had taken a step forward, and now, it was standing right behind her, mere inches from her back. Its breath was hot against her neck, its presence suffocating. The air was thick with the smell of decay, the scent of something long dead, yet still hungry. Lisa spun around, but the figure wasn't there. There was only the oppressive darkness of the attic, stretching out in every direction, suffocating her. She turned back to the mirror, but the reflection was gone. replaced by her own horrified face staring back at her. Suddenly, the attic door flew open with a deafening crack. The wind howled in from outside, sending a swirl of dust and debris through the room. Lisa staggered back, her mind reeling. She couldn't think straight. She needed to get out. She had to get out before. Before what? Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash from behind her. She whirled around, her heart in her throat. The attic was empty. The shadows shifted unnaturally, the silence pressing in from all sides. But something wasn't right. Then, a voice she recognized, pierced through the silence. Lisa. It was David's voice, but it was distorted, hollow, like it was coming from deep within the earth. Help me, Lisa. Please. Lisa's legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the floor. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. It was too much. She wanted to scream, but the air in the attic felt thick, like it was smothering her, drowning her. Suddenly, she felt something cold, so cold, slide across her wrist, a whisper of ice that sent waves of terror through her. She looked down, and her breath caught in her throat. A hand, a bony, skeletal hand, was gripping her wrist, its fingers long and twisted. With a cry of terror, she wrenched her arm free, stumbling backward toward the open door. But as she reached the threshold, the door slammed shut once more. The mirror behind her flickered, and in its depths, she saw something that made her blood freeze. David's face, but it was distorted, his eyes wide with fear and pain, as though he was trapped behind the glass. Lisa. The whisper echoed again, louder now, more urgent. And then a sudden, violent bang reverberated through the house. Something was coming. Something had awoken. Lisa's thoughts turned to David. Where is he? What has happened to him? The attic was no longer just an attic, it was a prison. And whatever had taken David was waiting for her too. The cold seeping through the floorboards was now more than just a chill. It was an icy tendril that wrapped itself around Lisa's heart, squeezing it with unrelenting pressure. The air felt thick, oppressive, like something was closing in from all sides. The very walls of the house groaned under the weight of what was happening, as if the house itself were alive, aware of the terror unfolding inside it. Lisa's breath came in shallow gasps, each one feeling like it could be her last. The whispers, those insistent, desperate voices, had quieted for a moment, but she knew it was only temporary. They were coming. They were always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike again. David's voice still lingered in her ears, the distorted sound of his plea twisted by the weight of fear. Help me, Lisa, please. It had come from the mirror, but now it was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the very foundation of the house itself. She could feel it pressing against her, like something alive was trying to crawl through the cracks and reach out to her. Lisa turned toward the stairs, her legs shaky, her mind spinning with fear and confusion. She had to get out. She had to find a way to leave the attic before whatever was in here consumed her, before it took her just like it had taken David, or worse, before it trapped her the same way it had him, forever. But just as she moved toward the stairs, she froze. There, standing at the top of the attic, was a figure. It wasn't the dark presence she had seen before, but it felt like it. The figure was barely more than a shadow, tall and thin, a silhouette against the faint light coming from the open door below. But what stopped her dead in her tracks was not the shadow itself, but the figure's eyes. They were glowing. Two orbs of light, eerie and unnatural, shining from the darkness. They were fixed on her, pinning her in place, making her feel as though she were a bug trapped in a spider's web. She couldn't move. She couldn't scream. She could only stand there, rooted to the spot, as the figure remained perfectly still, watching her with an intensity that chilled her to the bone. The whispers returned louder now, louder than ever. It was as if the very air in the room was humming with a malevolent energy. The voices were clearer now, but the words were strange, foreign even. She couldn't understand them, but they were undeniable, a steady rhythm of sounds that carried a deep sense of urgency. Lisa swallowed, her throat dry. She wanted to turn and run. She wanted to escape, to leave this house, to get as far away from whatever was in the attic as possible. But the figure's eyes, those glowing eyes, held her in place. "Help me." David's voice echoed again, this time coming from behind her. Her heart skipped a beat. She whipped around, but there was no one there. Only the flickering shadows of the attic, stretching and warping in unnatural shapes, as if the darkness itself was alive, responding to the presence of the figure in the doorway. Lisa stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had to get out. She had to, and then it moved. The figure at the top of the stairs took a single, slow step forward. A creak of the floorboards echoed in the silence, a sound so loud it seemed to reverberate through the house. Lisa's legs shook beneath her, but she couldn't look away. She was paralyzed by fear, her body unwilling to obey her frantic mind's commands. The figure moved again, another step. Its movements deliberate, too slow, like it was savoring every moment of her terror. Lisa. This time the voice wasn't David's. It wasn't anyone's. It was deep, guttural, like the sound of 1,000 voices speaking in unison, but there was no mistaking it. It was calling her. She felt it in her bones, a pull she couldn't resist. A whisper that turned into a command, compelling her to move closer, to walk toward it, as though she were a moth drawn to a flame. "Help me." Lisa could feel her own mind slipping away. She felt as if something was reaching inside of her, twisting her thoughts, bending them. The pull from the figure was overwhelming. She wanted to scream, to fight it, but it was as if her body was no longer hers. Her feet began moving on their own, slowly, mechanically, toward the top of the stairs. "No, no," she whispered, shaking her head, trying to break free of the trance that was overtaking her. But the closer she got to the figure, the less control she had over her own body. Her arms felt heavy, like lead. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, urging her forward. She could see the figure clearly now, though its features remained obscured by the darkness. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. The hood that shrouded its face cast shadows, so deep that she couldn't make out any features at all. But the eyes were unmistakable, glowing orbs of light that seemed to pierce through her soul. "Help me, Lisa." The words weren't a request anymore. They were a command, a demand, and Lisa, for reasons she could not understand, found herself obeying. She took another step, and another, until she was standing just inches from the figure. She could feel the cold radiating off of it, a bone, chilling frost that seeped into her skin and froze her blood. The air felt thick and heavy, as though the very room was closing in on her. Every breath felt like a struggle, as if she were suffocating. Then, the figure raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed toward the far wall of the attic. Lisa followed its gaze, but there was nothing there. Only the same shadows that had been lingering in the corners of the room. But as she stared at the spot the figure was pointing to, a low, rumbling growl filled the air. The shadows shifted. Something was moving beneath them, something alive. The shadows seemed to stretch and wreathe, pulling themselves into shape. A form began to emerge from the darkness, long and sinewy, like the body of some monstrous creature that had been hiding just beneath the surface all this time. It was massive, larger than any animal she had ever seen, its limbs stretched impossibly long, twisted into grotesque angles. Lisa gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just a figure in the shadows. It was alive. Something was coming, something from deep within the house, something that had been trapped beneath the floorboards, waiting for her to uncover it. And now it was free. The figure in front of her didn't move. It just stood there, watching as the creature in the shadows took shape. Its eyes burned with an intensity that could only mean one thing. It was waiting for her to make the first move. The creature in the shadows was moving closer now, its twisted limbs stretching toward her, reaching for her with hands that ended in claws, sharp and cruel. "Help me!" David's voice echoed in her mind again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't a plea anymore. It was an order. It was the creature speaking through David. Lisa felt her legs give way beneath her as the full weight of the situation slammed into her. She was no longer trapped in the attic with one dark figure. Now, there were two. Two forces, pulling her in different directions, each one fighting for control over her, and she didn't know which one was worse. Before she could react, the creature lunged, and the world went dark. Lisa's body was paralyzed, her limbs heavy as if shackled by invisible chains. She couldn't move. She couldn't scream. The creature was there, mere inches from her, its breath hot and rancid against her skin. Its presence was suffocating, a weight that pressed down on her chest and made her feel as though she might collapse under the force of it. The shadowed figure, standing silently behind her, had no need for words. Its eyes, still glowing with that unnatural light, burned into her soul. Lisa could feel it watching her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. But it wasn't just the figure that terrified her. It was what she could feel in the air, the heavy, electric charge of malevolent energy filling the space around her. It wasn't just the attic. It was the house itself. The walls seemed to shift, groaning like an old, dying beast, the foundation trembling beneath her feet. It was as though the very bones of the house were alive, moving, creaking, stretching to fit something new, something unnatural. The floor beneath her seemed unstable, shifting beneath her, as if the very ground was made of sand, threatening to swallow her whole. And then she saw it. The creature, no longer just a shadow, no longer a twisted form in the darkness, had materialized fully. Its body was enormous, easily twice her size, with limbs that were gnarled and long, twisted in unnatural directions. The arms and legs were covered in sickly pale skin that stretched too tightly, revealing the jagged lines of bone beneath. Its face was a twisted parody of human features, with hollow eyes, dark sockets that seemed to pierce through her, and a mouth that opened too wide to be natural. Teeth like broken shards of glass glinted in the darkness, dripping with what Lisa could only assume was blood, or something worse. The creature reached toward her, slow and deliberate, its fingers elongated like claws ready to tear into her flesh. "No!" Her mind screamed, but her body refused to respond. Every muscle in her body was frozen, a victim of whatever power this thing had over her. She could feel her heart thudding in her chest, could feel the cold sweat beating on her skin. But she was completely powerless to escape. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. The creature's hand was inches from her face, and it paused. It waited. It wasn't in a hurry. There was something deliberate, something cruel in its slowness. It seemed to savor the moment, as though enjoying her fear. The whispers, which had been a constant presence, suddenly rose in pitch, almost becoming a tangible force. They screamed at her, screamed for her to escape, to do something, anything, to break free. But the more they screamed, the more she felt herself slipping away from them. The creature was consuming her thoughts, drowning them with its presence. It was like it had already taken a part of her, something vital, and was now slowly devouring the rest. "Help me." Lisa's breath hitched as she heard the voice again. It was David's voice, unmistakable and full of desperation. But it wasn't coming from the attic this time. It wasn't coming from anywhere she could see. The voice was everywhere, as if it had always been there, buried deep inside the house, waiting for her to hear it. Her mind was reeling. The realization hit her with full force. This thing, this creature, this presence was not just from the attic. It was from the house itself. The house had been waiting, watching. It had been drawing her in all this time, luring her to this moment, preparing her for whatever this creature was about to do. Lisa's pulse raced as her mind screamed for her to escape. The house had always been alive. Always. The attic, the mirrors, the whispering. It had all been part of a plan, a long, slow unraveling that she had barely begun to understand. And David, her husband, he had been part of it too. Had he known? Had he been drawn into the same thing? Or had he become another pawn in the house's sick game? A cold, skeletal hand wrapped around her wrist, dragging her back toward the center of the attic. The creature, its claw, like fingers tightening around her arm, seemed to revel in her struggle, pulling her closer, forcing her to face it. Lisa's mind reeled. What do I do? What do I do? But there was no time. The creature was too close now, its breath foul and rancid, making her stomach turn. She could feel its cold, dead skin brushing against her, could feel its weight pressing down on her as it lifted her into the air, as if she weighed nothing at all. It was impossibly strong, stronger than anything she had ever encountered. It pulled her toward the center of the room, toward the darkness in the corner where the shadows seemed to grow darker, deeper, as though they were swallowing everything around them. Lisa's mind scrambled for an escape, but every thought, every idea was being torn away by the sheer force of the creature's presence. Help me, Lisa. David's voice. She didn't know where it was coming from anymore. Above her, below her, behind her. She had heard it in the mirror. But this time, she knew. It wasn't David. Not anymore. It was the house, using his voice, using her love for him to drag her deeper into the darkness. The creature threw her to the floor with a sickening thud. The air knocked out of her lungs. She gasped for breath, her heart hammering against her rib cage. Her vision blurred, the edges of her sight darkening as she struggled to regain control over her body. But her limbs felt like they were filled with lead. A guttural laugh echoed from the figure that still stood at the doorway, watching her with those unblinking, glowing eyes. It was waiting for something. It wasn't in a hurry. It wanted to savor the moment. It wanted to see her break. It wanted to see her lost. The mirror. She remembered the mirror. It had been the first sign, the first clue. The thing that had drawn her into this nightmare. She had felt it when she saw it. The whispers. The cold. The wrongness. It had been trying to show her something, trying to warn her. She needed to destroy it. The figure at the doorway stepped forward, its glowing eyes narrowing, as if sensing her thoughts. The creature didn't move. It just loomed over her, its cold eyes fixed on her with unsettling focus. Lisa crawled, inching her way toward the attic door. The creature's claws scraped against the floor as it turned to follow her, its movements slow but inevitable. She couldn't let it reach her. She couldn't let it touch her again. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she forced her body to move. Her legs screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain, the weakness. She had to reach the door. She had to break free before it was too late. As her hand touched the cold metal of the doorknob, the house seemed to groan. The air thickened. The shadows pressed in from all sides, closing her in, suffocating her. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, and the figure at the doorway grinned, the outline of its face stretching into something hideously inhuman. The door wouldn't open. The house was holding her there, trapping her. The creature took a step forward, its claws reaching toward her once more. And then, a sound that made Lisa's blood run cold. A scream. It wasn't David's voice. It wasn't her own. It came from the house, from deep within the walls. And the thing behind her reached out. The moment the creature's fingers brushed against her back, a cold wave surged through Lisa's body, numbing her from the inside out. She felt as though she were drowning in ice, cold water, unable to move, unable to escape. The house groaned again, its walls shifting as though the very foundation beneath her was alive, pressing in, eager to claim her as one of its own. Lisa's body convulsed, struggling to break free, but it felt like her limbs were encased in concrete. Every breath she drew felt like it was her last. The smell of decay filled the air, thick and suffocating. And the shadows, oh the shadows, were no longer just shadows. They had shape, they had weight. They moved like liquid, crawling over the walls, slithering across the floor. It was as though the house itself had turned into a living thing, feeding off her fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. The whispers, that incessant chorus of voices, had returned. This time, they were louder, more urgent, a swirling mass of despair and longing. But Lisa couldn't make out the words. The voices were all speaking at once, as though they were inside her head, their cries merging into one single, haunting plea. She needed to think. She needed to act. But every thought she had was quickly consumed by the weight of fear pressing against her chest. The figure in the doorway, the shadowed thing with glowing eyes, was still watching her, its gaze cold, unwavering. It hadn't moved, but Lisa could feel its presence growing, enveloping her in an impenetrable cloak of terror. It was like it was waiting for something, watching, calculating, savoring each moment of her struggle. And the creature was getting closer. Lisa's eyes darted around the attic, searching for any escape, any way out. She couldn't go back the way she had come. The door was blocked. She couldn't run. There was nowhere to hide. The entire house seemed to close in on her, its walls pressing tighter, suffocating her. She was trapped, cornered like an animal. There was no way out. And yet, there was something inside her that refused to give in. She couldn't explain it, but there was a force, deep within her, that was fighting to stay alive. The fear was consuming her, but it wasn't winning. Not yet. She wasn't going to let it. With every ounce of strength she had left, Lisa willed her body to move. She shoved the creature's clawed hand off of her, her fingers curling into the wooden floor beneath her, her nails scraping against the rough surface. The pain was sharp, but it didn't matter. It was just another reminder that she was still alive. Her hand found something. A small, jagged piece of wood sticking up from the floor, a loose plank, half rotten and decayed. It wasn't much, but it was something. She grabbed it with both hands, feeling the splinters tear into her palms, but she didn't care. It was a weapon, and in a place like this, she would need anything she could get. The creature lurched forward, its body shifting and writhing in unnatural ways as it reached for her again. Its claws stretched toward her, but this time, she didn't hesitate. With all her remaining strength, she swung the jagged piece of wood at the creature, aiming for its face. The impact was sharp, and for a moment, the creature faltered. It didn't scream. It didn't howl. It paused. Its hollow eyes seemed to narrow in something resembling surprise. The force of the blow had sent it stumbling back, just enough for Lisa to break free. She scrambled backward, her legs finally finding the strength to move, her heart pounding in her chest. The creature didn't follow her immediately. It seemed to be studying her, its eyes burning into her like hot coals. It wasn't angry, it was something worse. It was curious. But Lisa didn't stop to think about that. She had to run. She had to get away. She reached for the door again, her hands shaking as she grasped the cold metal knob. She twisted it, and this time, it opened. The sound of the door creaking on its hinges was like a cry of hope. Faint, fragile, but enough to give her the strength to keep going. She stumbled out of the attic, her body unsteady as she made her way down the narrow, rickety stairs. The shadows seemed to press in behind her, but she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to look back. The house was alive. It was watching her, guiding her, feeding off her fear. The whispers were louder now, mingling with the sound of her breath, her footsteps echoing in the dark hallway. But it was different now. The walls, the floors, they weren't just objects anymore. They were alive. They were part of it. Lisa's mind raced. She didn't know how long she had been in the attic. It could have been hours. It could have been days. Time had no meaning here. The house had its own rhythm, its own beat. It controlled everything. And whatever was happening, whatever had happened, was just the beginning. She reached the bottom of the stairs and ran into the hallway, her feet carrying her forward with no clear direction, no clear plan. She wasn't thinking. She was surviving. Suddenly, a sound caught her attention. A thud. A scraping noise. It came from the direction of the front door. She froze. The front door was still open. She hadn't closed it when she'd entered the house. But now, the door, it was moving. Slowly. Ever so slowly, it creaked as though someone, was trying to push it shut. Lisa's heart stopped. She didn't have to look to know what was waiting on the other side. She could feel it. She could feel the cold, the dread, the presence. The whispers stopped. Everything was still. And then, from the shadows, a new sound emerged. A voice, muffled at first, but growing clearer with every passing second. It was David's voice. But this time it wasn't pleading. It was laughing. The sound was hollow, chilling, a low, disturbing chuckle that sent a wave of nausea crashing over Lisa. It was David's voice, but it was wrong. It was twisted. And it was coming from behind the door. Without thinking, she ran. She ran down the hall, away from the door, away from whatever had taken David. But with each step she took, the house seemed to pulse around her. The walls closed in. The floor tilted beneath her feet. The shadows reached out with hungry fingers, and the laughter grew louder, more insane, more desperate. Lisa. Her breath caught in her throat. This time, it wasn't David. It was something else. She could feel it. Something else was here. And it wasn't finished with her yet. The house had more secrets to reveal. Lisa's feet slapped against the cold wooden floor, the echo of her steps reverberating in the dim, suffocating hallway. Her lungs burned with every breath, her chest heaving as she pushed herself forward. Her mind was racing, thoughts spiraling in every direction. Escape, survival, what had happened to David? What was this house? The house. The thing behind the walls was alive, and it had been waiting for her. For both of them. The laughter, that horrifying, distorted laughter, followed her like a shadow. It crept through the hall, echoing off the walls, growing louder with every step she took. It wasn't David's laugh. No, it couldn't be. That laugh was wrong, too wrong. It was a sickening, twisted thing, like the sound of nails scraping against stone. Help me. Her thoughts splintered again as the voice rang in her head, but it wasn't a voice at all. It was something worse. A command, a pull toward something unseen. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to ignore it, to run faster. But her legs felt like they were wading through cement. The house was dragging her back, pulling her deeper into its clutches. The walls seemed to pulse, as though they were breathing, as if they were alive and hungry. With a force of will, she reached the hallway's end, her hands trembling as she grabbed the old brass handle of the door that led outside. It rattled in her grasp, but it didn't open. She twisted and twisted, but the door wouldn't budge. No, no, no! She yanked at it, panic surging in her chest. She threw her entire weight against it, but the door was locked. The house, of course, it had locked her in. There was no way out. It wasn't letting her go. She stepped back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she turned toward the dark hallway that stretched behind her, swallowed by shadows. The whispers had returned. Fainter this time, but they were unmistakable, urging, calling, pleading. She could feel the house pressing in on her like a predator, its invisible hands wrapped around her throat, tightening with each passing second. It was alive. It was aware of her. And it was not done with her yet. And then there was that laughter again. Louder this time. Lisa. I'm here." Her blood ran cold. The voice was unmistakable. It was David's voice, but it wasn't right. It was hollow, dead. Her heart skipped a beat as she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, but all she could see was the darkness of the hallway stretching out before her. The shadows seemed to curl and wreath, twisting around the corners, drawing her back. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, damp wood, and something worse, something that made her gag. She couldn't breathe. The voice again, closer this time. And then the unmistakable sound of nails scraping across wood, a screeching, dragging sound that made Lisa's skin crawl. A figure emerged from the darkness, slowly, too slowly, a figure she knew, yet didn't recognize David. But not David as she knew him. His face was pale, drawn tight. The skin stretched too thin across his cheekbones. His eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his skull, but they were awake. And his mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin that didn't belong to him, revealing sharp, broken teeth. His hair hung loosely around his face, wild and matted as though he had been trapped in this place for much longer than she had. She took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "No, David." Her voice was a whisper, hoarse with fear. She wanted to reach out to him, to pull him back from whatever madness had taken him, but the figure before her wasn't David. It couldn't be. His head tilted to the side, an unnervingly slow, deliberate movement, and his lips parted. "Help me, Lisa." But this time, his voice wasn't distorted. It wasn't twisted. It was David's voice, unmistakable. It was the same voice she had heard over and over, the same voice she had dreamed of for days, weeks. His voice was full of pain, full of torment, but it was also full of pleading. Lisa's heart shattered. She felt a pang of guilt, a burning need to help him. She couldn't leave him here. She couldn't abandon him. Not like this. "David," her voice cracked, and she took another step toward him, a fragile thread of hope pulling her forward. The door was locked. She couldn't escape, but she could still help him. She had to. His eyes narrowed, his head tilting further. The smile on his face grew wider, grotesquely so. It stretched too far, like it wasn't his smile at all. "No," he rasped. "You can't help me." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The voice wasn't David's anymore. It wasn't even close. The words were hollow, empty. The figure in front of her. It wasn't David. It was something that had taken him. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled, a deep, rumbling shake that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. The entire house shook, as though it were waking up, as though it were alive and growing stronger. A screeching, unnatural noise filled the air, like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. The walls quaked, and the house groaned as if it were coming to life, drawing its power from her fear, feeding off her desperation. It was all a lie. The house had never been David's. It had never been hers. It had been alive this whole time, feeding, watching, waiting. The shadowed figure that had been David took a step toward her, its movements too slow, deliberate, like it was savoring each moment of her terror. "Lisa," it hissed. "There's no escape." It was then that Lisa saw it, the truth. Behind the twisted form of David, beneath the flesh and bone, there was a darkness, a void, a presence so deep, so ancient. It had no shape, no face, no name. It was something that had been buried here, deep within the house, for centuries. It had been feeding on the lives of everyone who had ever stepped foot inside. It had claimed them all. Lisa's mind screamed. She understood now. This was not just a house. It was a prison, a living, breathing trap. And David, her husband, had become one of its victims, a pawn in the house's endless hunger. The thing that had taken him wasn't him anymore. It wasn't David. It was something else. And now it was coming for her. The shadow figure reached toward her, its hands stretched out, the fingers elongated and twisted like claws. It wasn't David. It wasn't even human. It was just the house that fed. And with a sickening, final lurch, the figure grabbed her by the wrist. Everything around her went dark. The house had claimed her. And in the dark, she could hear it, echoing through the walls, through her mind, welcome home. The air around Lisa turned to stone, as if the very atmosphere had become suffocating and thick, pressing down on her chest, squeezing the life from her. She couldn't breathe. The walls closed in, the shadows stretched. And she felt them, those unseen hands of the house, curling around her limbs, pinning her in place. The darkness was alive in ways she couldn't understand, alive in ways she could feel. She was lost in the house, lost in its maze of halls and rooms, its twisting corridors. Every step she took seemed to lead her deeper into its heart, deeper into its suffocating grasp. The laughter had stopped. The whispers had faded. But the presence of the house, the thing that had been waiting, was all around her now, pushing, pulling, suffocating her. And then it spoke. Lisa gasped, her heart thundering in her chest. She couldn't tell where the voice had come from. It wasn't from the walls. It wasn't from the shadows. It wasn't even from the thing that had once been David. It was in her head, in the deepest recesses of her mind, whispering to her, curling itself around her thoughts, forcing her to listen. "You're not alone here," the voice said, its tone cold, metallic, and impossibly ancient. It resonated deep within her, a hum that vibrated through her very bones. "You're part of me now. You've always been part of me, and I'm not done with you." Lisa's stomach churned. The truth, the terrible truth, began to seep into her mind, piece by piece. She had always been part of this. She had been drawn here, drawn to this house, because it had known her. It had always known her. Her breath caught in her throat as the memories flooded her. Her childhood, her family, the stories her grandmother had told her of their bloodline, of their connection to the old house. The house had always been a part of her. From the moment she had been born, the house had been waiting, watching, feeding off her family. One generation after another, she had never left. She had never escaped. The house was more than just a structure. It was a living, breathing entity that fed on the souls of those who entered it. It grew stronger with every life it claimed, and Lisa was just another offering. "No," Lisa cried out, her voice breaking. But it didn't matter. The house's grip tightened, and with it, the truth grew heavier in her mind. There was no escape. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't fight it. She had been chosen long before she had ever set foot in the house. David's laughter echoed again, but this time, it wasn't just his laugh. It was the house's laugh, rich and deep and mocking. The sound swirled around her like a tornado, filling her ears, vibrating against her skull. It was everywhere, suffocating her, drowning her. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet gave way. She stumbled, feeling as though the very house was trying to swallow her, the floor opening up beneath her, the walls pulling away, stretching, distorting. The house was shifting, alive with hunger. A sound broke through the madness. A single, sharp sound, a door opening. Lisa's head snapped up, her heart pounding as she turned toward it, desperate for something, anything. Her breath was ragged, her chest tight, but she couldn't ignore it. The door, was there, at the end of the hallway, just barely visible through the shifting shadows. It was the door. The one she had seen in the corner of her mind. The one that had always been there. With every ounce of strength she could muster, Lisa pushed herself forward. She ran, the air growing heavier with every step. The weight of the house's gaze pressing down on her, suffocating her. But the door was there, waiting, and she could feel it calling to her, beckoning her like a faint light in the dark. Her fingers brushed the cold handle, and she twisted it, slamming the door open with all her force. But what she found on the other side was not what she had expected. It was a room, but not just any room. It was a place she recognized, her childhood bedroom. Her heart lurched in her chest. It was exactly the same, the same faded wallpaper, the same old wooden dresser, the same small bed covered in an old quilt, the same tiny window with the same view of the trees outside. But there was something wrong. There was no light. The room was filled with shadows, but they were deeper, darker. The corners of the room seemed to stretch on forever, as though the room had no end, no limits. It was as if the space was growing larger, and Lisa was getting smaller, swallowed by it. A voice echoed, not David's, not the thing in the hallway, but her own. Lisa. It was a whisper, faint at first, but growing louder. It wasn't coming from the walls, the room, or the shadows. It was coming from inside her own mind, from somewhere deep within her. You're here. She turned, but there was no one. No one to be seen. Just the room, the same room that had once been her sanctuary, her place of comfort. Her gaze fell to the bed, and there, lying on the mattress, was a figure. A small child, curled up in the center, their back to her. Lisa took a step forward, confusion settling in her chest. Her breath quickened, panic creeping into her heart. The child, it was her. But it wasn't right. It was her as a little girl, but not. Her face was pale, twisted, as though something were wrong, something had taken it. The little girl's eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, but there was nothing in them. No life, no soul. No. Lisa whispered, choking on the word. She reached out, her hand trembling, but as she moved closer, the room seemed to shift again, to pull her in. Help me. The voice whispered again, but it wasn't the child. It wasn't Lisa's voice. It was something else, something darker, something older. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The child in the bed began to writhe, its body stretching and twisting unnaturally, growing too large for the bed, too large for the room. The shadows surged forward, filling the room, closing in on her. The last door, the one that had led her to her childhood room, slammed shut. Lisa screamed, but no one was there to hear her. No one would ever hear her again. And in the suffocating darkness of the house, the whispers began once more, louder than before. Welcome home, Lisa. You've always been part of me. And the house fed. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest, every thud reverberating in the suffocating silence. The room was no longer just a room. It had turned into a vast, endless expanse, a place where the very laws of reality seemed to bend and break. The shadows writhed like living creatures, crawling up the walls, pooling in the corners, stretching toward her. The very air felt thick with a presence that wasn't just malevolent, but ancient, hungry. Her breath was shallow, her hands clammy as they gripped the edge of the bed. The child, her twisted, hollow reflection, continued to writhe in the bed, its body contorting in unnatural ways, its limbs stretching far beyond what was humanly possible. The face, once her own, now seemed to peel away, revealing a grotesque, empty shell. It was as though the thing in the bed was wearing her skin, wearing her past. The room, no. The house seemed to pulse with every breath she took. It was alive. She could feel it, alive in a way that shouldn't be possible. It was feeding on her fear, on her confusion, twisting the world around her, trapping her in its unholy grasp. The voice whispered again, that same dark, familiar voice. It was her voice, but not. The words it spoke were not her own thoughts, but an invitation to something darker. You've always been part of me. Lisa wanted to scream, but her throat tightened as if invisible hands were wrapped around her neck, squeezing the breath from her. She couldn't run, couldn't escape. The door had slammed shut, trapping her inside. The walls seemed to stretch, pushing inward, closing the space around her until the room was shrinking, and she was growing smaller. The child in the bed twisted more violently, its back arching at an impossible angle, and the shadows surged forward, as though they were waiting for something. The house was feeding, and she was the feast. Her mind screamed for release, but her body refused to obey. She couldn't move. The shadows began to climb over her, crawling across her skin, colder than ice. They whispered to her, voices hissing from the walls, from the floor, from every corner of the room. "You're not alone here, Lisa." They cooed, their voices like 1,000 ghosts trapped in the same voice. "You can't escape." She closed her eyes, fighting the terror that threatened to swallow her whole, trying to block out the whispers, the cold, the relentless pull of the house. But when she opened them again, she saw it. The room wasn't just a room anymore. It had more. There were no windows, no light. The shadows weren't shadows. They were faces, eyes. Eyes that stared back at her from every inch of the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling. Faces contorted in agony, mouths gaping open in screams of silence. The house was alive. It had always been alive. It was feeding on the souls of those who entered, drawing them in, twisting their essence into its own. And it had been waiting for her, waiting for this moment when she would finally see it for what it truly was. Her legs finally moved, but they carried her backward, away from the bed, away from the child that was no longer her. The twisted figure grinned, its mouth opening impossibly wide, revealing rows of teeth that seemed to stretch down its throat, too many to count, jagged and broken. Lisa's heart raced as she backed into the wall. She couldn't move forward. The door, the only way out, was locked, and even if it weren't, she knew there was nowhere to go. The house would never let her leave. Not now. Not ever. The creature in the bed, her twisted self, began to speak. Its voice was garbled, distorted as though something was clawing at the inside of its throat, trying to escape. "Help me, Lisa." The words were full of pain, full of torment. They were full of desperation, and yet they weren't hers. "You can't save yourself. You can't save anyone. You belong to me." Lisa shook her head violently, trying to break free of the suffocating grip the house had on her mind, trying to make sense of the madness that was swirling around her. She had to think. She had to do something. The voice, the true voice, called out from the shadows, louder this time, filling the entire room with its hunger. It was waiting for her, waiting to claim her. Suddenly, the walls began to ripple like liquid. The shadows writhed and twisted together, merging into something new, something worse. The darkness was no longer just a void. It had form. It was a mass, a living, breathing thing, pulling itself out of the corners of the room, slithering across the floor, taking shape. Lisa's eyes widened in horror as the figure began to emerge, its silhouette growing taller, wider. A deep, guttural growl filled the air, a sound so primal, so full of malice, that Lisa's blood ran cold. It was here. The thing that had been waiting for her, waiting to claim her as it had claimed so many others before her. And then it spoke. "Liza, welcome home." The voice was low, rumbling, ancient. It was the house. The creature. Both. Lisa's legs gave way, her body collapsing to the floor as the reality of it all settled in. The walls, the floor, the shadows. They were all part of it. Part of the house. She had never stood a chance. The last thing she saw before the darkness consumed her was the face of the creature. An enormous, grotesque form made of writhing shadows, eyes that burned with the intensity of 1,000 lost souls, and a mouth that stretched open in a terrible, victorious grin. It was waiting, and now she was a part of it. Lisa's eyes snapped open, but the world around her was no longer the room she had been trapped in. She was no longer in the confines of the house, or at least, that's what she thought at first. The air was cold, frigid, so much colder than before. It was as if the very essence of the house had left with her, or perhaps it had taken her somewhere else, a place deeper within its walls, a place from which there would be no return. But then she realized, the darkness was still there, the suffocating blackness, the feeling of being swallowed whole, and the whispers, the endless, maddening whispers that seemed to echo from every direction, clawing at her mind, urging her to listen, to understand, to submit. Lisa. The voice was distant at first, but it wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a low, mournful growl that reverberated through her skull, as if the house itself were speaking directly into her mind. Lisa, you are mine. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't escape the pull, the presence that had followed her from the attic, that had consumed her when she stepped into that place, that twisted her own reflection into something else, something far darker. The air was thick with an oppressive weight, a pressure building on her chest. Lisa gasped, her breath catching in her throat, but no matter how she tried to inhale, she felt as though there was no air to fill her lungs. She reached out for anything to break free from the suffocating grip of the house. But her fingers met nothing. Her body felt like it was suspended in midair, weightless, but trapped all at once. The shadows around her didn't have form, but she could feel them. They were there. They were closing in. She had the sense that the walls, the floor, the air itself was alive in ways that defied all logic, all reason. And then she saw it. A flicker of light. A flicker that didn't belong. Her heart skipped a beat, and she tried to reach for it, her body aching, every movement a struggle, as though she were fighting through thick, wet mud. The light grew brighter, and as it did, the shadows retreated, pulling back as if they feared it. Lisa's mind raced, her thoughts stumbling over each other. What was happening? Where was she? Was she still in the house, or had the house somehow consumed her completely, swallowed her soul whole? But the light was something else. It wasn't the glow of a fire or a lamp. It was something far more ethereal, something that felt pure. A stark contrast to the malevolent force she had been entangled in for so long. The voice returned, but this time it was different. You can't hide from me, Lisa, it whispered, but the voice was less certain now. The darkness trembled, and the shadows writhed in agitation. The house was losing control. Lisa's pulse raced. She felt the chains around her chest, the weight of the fear lifting. She could move again. Slowly at first, but the power of the light was growing. With every inch, she felt herself being pulled forward, closer to the source. You belong to me, the voice hissed again, its fury mounting. The darkness surged forward, slamming into her, pushing her back, but the light fought back, pushing the shadows aside. And suddenly, Lisa understood. The house wasn't just a house. It was something older, something deeper. A prison, a parasite that had feasted on generations. It had fed off the fear, the suffering of every soul that had ever stepped foot inside. And it had fed off her. The bloodline that had been tied to this place for centuries. But now it was losing. Lisa's breath hitched as she saw it, the heart of the darkness, the center of it all. There in the distance, bathed in the glow of the light, she saw the figure again. The creature. The thing that had once been David, now more monstrous than before, its hollow eyes burning with an otherworldly rage. It was bound to the house. It was part of it. A puppet of darkness. A servant to the very walls that had swallowed everything. The light wanted her to see it. It wanted her to understand that this wasn't just a battle between her and the house. It was a fight between her bloodline and the very thing that had fed on her family for generations. The house wasn't just alive. It was a beast, hungry and eternal. And it would not stop until it had consumed every last piece of Lisa's soul. But this time, Lisa wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. The light was with her. The light was part of her. And the house, with all its power and hunger, was losing. With a fierce determination, she stepped forward, her feet finding solid ground as the light grew brighter still. It pierced the darkness like a spear, burning through the malevolent force that had claimed so many before her. The shadows screamed, writhing, burning away as the light engulfed everything. The creature, the twisted form of David, howled in agony, its hollow eyes wide with terror. "No, you can't." But Lisa wasn't listening. She was done listening. She was done being consumed. The light exploded, a blinding flash that filled every corner of the house, every inch of the world around her, until there was nothing left but brilliance. The darkness shrieked, howled, and for the first time it faded, and then there was nothing. Silence. A stillness that stretched for eternity. Lisa blinked, her eyes adjusting to the bright clarity around her. Slowly, she looked around, her heart racing in her chest, but the world she saw now was different. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the suffocating darkness. She was outside. The sky above was an endless expanse of blue, the air fresh and clean. She could feel the earth beneath her feet, solid and real. There were no shadows here, no voices, no hunger. But in the distance, she could still hear a whisper, a faint, lingering echo. Lisa, it wasn't the house. It wasn't the creature. It was something else. Something ancient. But Lisa knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that whatever it was, it no longer had power over her. The house was gone. And now, so was the darkness. She was free. The air felt lighter, but there was a heaviness that clung to Lisa, a weight deep inside her chest. It wasn't just relief, not completely. Something still tugged at her, like a thread left dangling, its end somewhere in the distance, waiting to be pulled again. The landscape around her was eerily serene, a perfect contrast to the nightmare she'd just escaped. Rolling hills of green grass stretched out before her, the sky above unblemished by a single cloud. The earth beneath her was solid, grounding her in the present, but there was something off about the stillness. The air was calm, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the tranquility wasn't as peaceful as it appeared. As she stood there, the whisper came again, softer this time, almost like a memory. Lisa, her breath hitched. She turned, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing. No figure, no shape in the distance. The world around her seemed untouched by the terror she had just endured. But the whisper didn't stop. Lisa, it was calling to her, from somewhere deeper, more distant now. It was familiar, but there was no comfort in it. Only a reminder of what she had left behind. Something was still there, and as the wind picked up, blowing across the hills, Lisa felt it. The house. It wasn't gone, not completely. It was still tethered to her, to the world in ways she couldn't yet understand. It had been destroyed, yes, but its influence, its pull was lingering, like a shadow following her every step. Her pulse quickened. The house, its darkness, its hunger, it was always going to be a part of her. She could feel it now, buried deep in her mind, gnawing at her thoughts. The thing she had fought, the thing that had fed off her family for generations, hadn't disappeared. It had changed. The whisper became clearer, its voice now unmistakably close. "Come back, Lisa," she gasped, turning in a circle, searching for the source, but there was nothing but the vast emptiness stretching before her. A shiver ran down her spine as she took a step back. It was like a shadow was reaching out, one that she could feel, but couldn't see. Suddenly, her feet felt heavy, as if the earth beneath her was shifting, warping, pulling her down. The ground beneath her trembled, and the perfect scene around her began to flicker, the edges of the world growing unstable. The hills, the sky, everything was bending, warping, as if the very fabric of reality was stretching. And then she heard it. A sound, like an old door creaking open. Her breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide, and her pulse raced as the world around her unraveled. It was the house. It was pulling her back. The whisper came again. "Lisa, you can't escape me." It was no longer just a whisper. It was a voice, clear and loud in her mind, a command she couldn't ignore. With a force that made her heart stop, Lisa stumbled backward, her body sinking into the earth as the ground below her crumbled. The house wasn't gone. It wasn't finished. It was just biding its time, waiting for her, and now it was calling her back. Before she could scream, before she could even comprehend what was happening, the world around her splintered, falling apart like a shattered glass mirror. The landscape fractured, crumbling away into the same dark abyss she had just escaped. The house, its walls, its shadows, began to reassemble in front of her, drawn together like a living thing, reaching for her, pulling her into its depths. "No!" she cried out, struggling to move, but her body was locked in place. The whisper turned into a growl, a low, menacing sound. The darkness grew again, folding in around her, and her feet were dragged toward the house, back into its embrace. The door was open, waiting for her. Her mind screamed for escape, but her body betrayed her, moving against her will. Her chest tightened, every breath an agonizing struggle, as she was pulled closer to the house, the place that had already claimed so much. She thought of David, of the twisted form she had seen in the mirror, of the shadowed figure at the top of the stairs. Had she really escaped? Was this freedom, or had it all been part of a larger game, one that had been played before, one that had been waiting for her? "Help, Mill." The words came from somewhere deep within her. Not from the house, not from the creature that had haunted her. It was her own voice. Her own voice, but not the one she had known. The house, it hadn't just taken David. It had taken her, too. Not her body, but her soul, her essence, her bloodline. It had been feeding on her family for generations. And no matter how far she ran, no matter how much she fought, it was never going to let her go. She was tied to it. Lisa's eyes widened in horror as the house loomed closer, its dark walls pulling her in, wrapping around her like chains. She was inside. She was back. But this time, she wasn't fighting to leave. She was fighting for her soul. Lisa's body trembled, but her mind was clearer now, sharper than ever. The walls of the house pressed in on her, their darkness threatening to swallow her whole, but there was something different this time. She wasn't just a terrified woman trapped in a nightmare. She understood the house now, felt its pulse in the air, its hunger crawling beneath her skin. And most importantly, she understood that it could not have her, not without a fight. Her feet moved against her will, dragging her toward the center of the house, where the source of all the darkness seemed to grow. The whispers had turned to laughter, low, mocking, and deep, echoing around her, as if the house itself were alive, feeding off her fear. Yet, despite the horror that still gripped her heart, she felt an unusual stillness inside, a quiet resolve, the realization that she had not come this far just to surrender. "You're mine," Lisa, the voice hissed, and for a moment, it sounded like David, distorted, broken, but unmistakably him. She wanted to scream, wanted to tell him that she wasn't his anymore, but the words lodged in her throat. The house was watching. The house was listening. But it was no longer in control. With every step she took, the darkness swelled, but the light inside her, however faint, grew stronger. It flickered in the back of her mind, reminding her of the time when she first felt it, the warmth that had driven the shadows back in the attic. It wasn't gone. It was always there, buried deep, a part of her, tied to something ancient, something beyond the house's reach. The laughter became louder, the walls narrowing around her. She was almost at the heart of the house, the source of its power. A giant room, enormous and cavernous, stretched out before her. The air was thick, oppressive, but it wasn't the shadows alone that made her skin crawl. It was the presence. She could feel it crawling inside her veins, seeping into her bones. It was the house, its mind, its will. It wasn't just a structure, it was a parasite, a creature of darkness. And in the center of the room, standing tall and shadowed, was the mirror. Lisa stopped dead in her tracks, her breath caught in her throat. The mirror. The thing that had shown her twisted visions of herself, that had dragged her deeper into this hell. She could feel its power. The same power that had tortured her, broken her spirit, warped her reality. But this time, she wasn't afraid. Lisa. The whisper came again, a sing-song voice laced with venom and deceit. It was familiar, like a memory just out of reach, a voice she had known, but twisted and corrupted by the house. I have you now. There is no escape. You belong to me. The mirror reflected her, broken, bruised, trembling, but with something else in her eyes. Resolve. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes glowing with an unnatural light, her mouth curling into a determined smile. For a moment, she didn't recognize the person in the mirror. She had become something else, something more. No, she whispered to the reflection, her voice steady, unshaken. You don't get to keep me. Not now. Not ever. With a strength she didn't know she had, Lisa reached out to the mirror. The glass seemed to shiver under her touch, its surface rippling like water, distorting the image of herself. The shadows in the room recoiled, as if the very air was aware of what she was about to do. The darkness in the room pressed in, suffocating, but she fought against it, forcing her hand to grip the edges of the mirror. The house screamed, a cacophony of voices rising around her. The walls groaned as though the very foundation was shifting, trying to break apart. But she was focused, her hand trembling not from fear, but from the power she now felt coursing through her. She could destroy this. She could end it. With a cry, Lisa slammed her hand into the mirror, and the room exploded with blinding light. The darkness shattered like glass, splintering into pieces, evaporating like smoke into the air. The house howled in protest, its mind recoiling as if it was dying, its grip on her fading. The ground beneath her shook, the walls collapsing into themselves. The mirror fractured, and the image of Lisa, twisted and distorted, crumbled to dust. And then everything went silent. Lisa stood there, breathing heavily, her heart racing in her chest, her body covered in cold sweat. The shadows were gone. The house was gone. The air around her was still, calm, almost peaceful. She could feel the warmth of the light returning, wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. But the silence was deafening. She looked around, her mind still trying to make sense of what had just happened. The house was no longer there, no longer alive. There were no whispers, no darkness, no presence that tugged at her mind. It was just empty. She had done it. She had finally broken free. But even as she took a deep breath, a thought echoed in her mind, faint but undeniable. The house might be gone, but it had left something behind. Lisa turned around, her eyes scanning the now blank, empty room, and her gaze fell on the only thing that remained in the room, an old, crumpled piece of paper on the floor, a symbol etched onto its surface. With hesitant steps, she walked forward, bending down to pick it up. The symbol was familiar. She had seen it before. It was the same mark that had been on the mirror, on the walls, on everything that had been tied to the house. The mark of the house, of the entity that had been feeding on her family for generations. But now, something had changed. The symbol on the paper glowed, pulsing with an otherworldly light, as if it had been waiting for her to notice it. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Lisa's heart skipped a beat, not in fear, but in understanding. The house might have been destroyed, but its influence, the power it had never truly gone away. And now, she was the one who carried it. The air around her seemed to thicken, heavy once again, and Lisa realized that the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The house had left its mark on her, and it had always been part of her. And if there was one thing she now knew about the house, it had only just begun. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest, and a chill crept up her spine as she held the paper with the glowing symbol. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the realization of what she was holding, what she had just unleashed. The symbol pulsed with life, a silent, insistent rhythm, as if it were alive and aware. It thrummed in her hands, resonating with something deep within her. She felt its presence, not in the air, but within herself. The house had infected her, tied itself to her very essence. And now she could feel the weight of its curse resting in her veins, wrapped around her soul. It had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, in the walls, in the darkness, waiting for the moment when it could finally take hold. And now, it had succeeded. Her pulse quickened as she looked down at the paper. The symbol, now familiar, was more than just a mark. It was a doorway, an invitation, an anchor to something far older, far more powerful than the house itself. Something beyond her understanding. The light that had surrounded her, the warmth that had briefly offered solace, now seemed distant, like a flickering flame in a vast darkness. Her thoughts swirled, a cacophony of confusion and terror. How was she supposed to go on? How could she ever truly be free when that thing, still lingered inside her? Help me. The whisper came again, but this time, it wasn't from the house. It wasn't from the walls or the shadows. It came from deep inside her, from somewhere in her mind, twisted and fractured, like an echo of a forgotten memory. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the voice grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't David anymore. It wasn't even the house. It was something new. Something she had unknowingly called into being. The symbol on the paper flared, the lines shifting, twisting into shapes that shouldn't have existed. It seemed to bleed into the very air around her, turning the space into something unrecognizable. The room began to distort, stretching and warping, and the world around her dissolved like smoke, leaving her standing in the dark, alone in the depths of a nightmare she had barely begun to understand. Lisa. The voice again. Closer, clearer. It was calling her name, but it wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a command, a plea. Come to me. Her eyes snapped open, and for a moment, she thought she saw something. Someone, standing before her. The figure was cloaked in shadow, a silhouette at the edge of her vision. But when she turned to look, it was gone. The room returned to its unsettling emptiness, the oppressive silence now louder than ever. It wasn't real, but the sensation, the pull was. The paper in her hand burned with a cold fire, a signal, a tether, pulling her toward the dark. And in that moment, she understood. This was just the beginning. The house had been more than a place. It had been an anchor, a prison, a living thing that had fed off her fear and her bloodline for generations. But it wasn't destroyed. It had changed. It had taken root inside her. And now, it was pulling her into something far darker, something far more ancient than she could have imagined. Lisa clenched her teeth, the sound of her own breath harsh and ragged in the quiet. She couldn't fight it. She couldn't resist. Every part of her screamed to flee, to leave this place, but she was drawn forward, bound to the darkness. Her body moved on its own accord, stepping deeper into the shifting, ever-changing landscape. Her feet carried her, each step echoing louder in the quiet, the air growing heavier with every moment. The shadows stretched out before her like a vast, living thing, and at the center of it all, she saw it, the door. A massive archway stood before her, its edges marked with the same symbol that had been burned into the paper in her hands. It seemed to call to her, a promise of something that would give her answers, or perhaps something far worse. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached, each step pulling her closer to the inevitable. She could feel it now, the house's hunger, waiting, lurking just beyond the threshold. The door creaked open slowly, and with it came a rush of cold air, sharp and bitter, like death itself had entered the room. Lisa felt herself drawn forward. The paper clutched tightly in her hand, as though it was her only lifeline. With a deep breath, she stepped inside. The world around her twisted again, the air thick with a presence that suffocated her. The space beyond the door was a vast cavern, stretching endlessly in every direction. There were no walls, no floors. It was as if the universe itself had been torn open. And in the center of it all, standing tall and silent, was a figure. It was her. Or rather, it looked like her, an older version of herself, one with hollow eyes and a twisted, knowing smile. The figure's skin was pale, cracked in places, as though it had been worn down by time, and its gaze was full of hunger, full of endless patience. "I've been waiting for you," the figure said, its voice both familiar and utterly alien. It echoed in the empty space, reverberating off nothing. Lisa froze, her body locked in place. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as though the air itself had been stolen from her lungs, leaving only the hollow echo of her heartbeat. "You have come home," the figure said, its voice low and cold. "You belong to this place. To me." The realization hit her with the force of a lightning strike. The house had never been a house at all. It had been alive, a being that had always been tied to her bloodline, to her very soul. She had always been a part of it, and it had always been a part of her. The figure stepped forward, its footsteps silent, its eyes never leaving hers. "I am the beginning, the end, the eternal. And you are mine, Lisa. You always have been." The air around her grew colder, darker, and Lisa felt the pull again, stronger this time. The house wasn't gone. It wasn't finished. It had simply changed. It had found her again. And in that moment, she realized the terrible truth. There was no escaping the house. There was no escape from what it was, what it had made her. No matter how far she ran, no matter how hard she fought, the house was a part of her. She had always been part of it. And now, the house was claiming her once more. "Welcome home, Lisa." And in the endless void, the figure smiled. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as the figure's words echoed in her mind. "Welcome home, Lisa." The voice was a soft caress, but there was nothing comforting about it. It was a command, a statement of ownership, of possession. The world around her seemed to press in, the void stretching farther and farther, as if she were drowning in the infinite blackness. The figure, the older version of herself, the twisted reflection, took another step forward, the silence around them growing suffocating. Every step it took seemed to reverberate in the very core of her being, shaking her with a terror that curled into the marrow of her bones. "You've always been mine," the figure said again, its voice more insistent, more real. The words seemed to fill the space around her, seeping into her consciousness, knowing at the edges of her thoughts. "The house is my body, and you are my blood. We are bound together. We always have been." Lisa staggered back, her heart pounding, every muscle in her body screaming for escape, but she was frozen, rooted in place. The figure's hollow eyes were locked onto her own, its smile widening as if it could see every part of her deepest fears, her darkest thoughts, her greatest regrets. Her hands trembled as they clutched the paper with the symbol. Still pulsing with that strange energy, it felt alive, like it was breathing in her hands. The symbol wasn't just a key to the house. It was a key to her own soul. A tether to the dark entity that had created this nightmare. She realized with horrifying clarity that the house had never been merely a physical structure. It was part of something far older, something that had been waiting for her, just as she had been waiting for it. The figure tilted its head, its smile widening, as if it knew exactly what she was thinking. "You think you've escaped, don't you?" it said, its voice a mocking whisper in the void. "You think the house is gone, but you're wrong. It's always been here. It's always been a part of you. You can't outrun what you are." Lisa's hands shook as she clutched the paper tighter, the pulsing symbol feeling, as though it were burrowing deeper into her skin. She wasn't sure if it was the paper or her own blood that was feeding the mark, but she could feel its power, its weight pressing down on her chest. Every breath felt like it was being siphoned away. "You were chosen, Lisa." The figure continued, its voice now a guttural rasp, as if it had become one with the shadows. Chosen to carry the legacy. The house was built for you. You are its heir, and it is yours. Forever. The room, if it could even be called that, shifted around her. The darkness swirling like smoke, growing thicker and more oppressive. She could no longer distinguish what was real, what was imagined. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all of them felt like they were bending toward her, pressing in, suffocating her. No. Lisa gasped, her throat raw, but the words felt weak in the face of the overwhelming presence that surrounded her. The air itself was alive, and it was hungry. No, this isn't real. This isn't who I am. The figure laughed softly, the sound echoing in the void like 100 voices. Isn't it? You're my creation, Lisa. You were made for this. Everything you've done, everything you've felt, all of it has led you here to this moment. Lisa closed her eyes, fighting against the rising tide of panic that threatened to consume her. She could feel the darkness pressing into her, trying to swallow her whole, but she refused to let it. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just the house's prisoner. She had a choice. It was then that something inside her stirred. A small flicker of defiance, barely a whisper of hope, but strong enough to make her reach deep within herself. She had always been a part of it, the figure had said, but it had never truly had her. She was not just bloodline, not just a victim of fate. She was a fighter. With a sharp intake of breath, Lisa clenched her fist around the symbol, feeling its pulse in her hand. She felt the darkness pushing at her from every side, but she pushed back. Her voice trembled, but it was steady. I'm not you. I'm not the house. I'm not its ear. I won't let you win. The figure's eyes narrowed, the smile on its face turning into a cruel sneer. You think you can defy me? It hissed. You think you can break free from your fate? You will never escape. You will never be free of the house. You are mine. But Lisa's resolve was unwavering. She felt the weight of her ancestors, their voices rising inside her, not as whispers, but as a chorus of strength. The house had fed on their fear, on their helplessness. But it had never known her. Her chest burned with a heat she hadn't felt in years, a fire that rose from deep within her. She raised her hand, the paper glowing brighter in her grip, and the darkness around her recoiled, momentarily retreating. The figure's sneer faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. You have no power over me, she spat, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. You've never had power over me. And with that, she let go of the paper. It disintegrated in her hands, the symbol flaring up one last time before it was consumed by light. For a brief moment, the house, the darkness, stilled. The figure before her blinked, its cruel smile fading. The house had lost. The figure screamed in fury, its voice distorting, ripping apart as if it were being torn to pieces. The light surrounding Lisa intensified, growing brighter until the darkness was pushed back entirely, banished like a nightmare fading in the morning sun. And then, silence. Lisa's breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling. But she felt the weight of the house, its hunger, its pull, finally lifting from her. The air around her was still, quiet, as though the universe itself were holding its breath. She could feel the remnants of the house's presence retreating, fading into nothingness. It was over. The figure was gone, consumed by the light she had summoned from within. And as Lisa stood there, in the void that had once been the heart of the house, she knew she was free. The house, the darkness, the shadows that had haunted her family for generations were gone. For now, she closed her eyes, but for the first time in what felt like eternity, she didn't feel fear. She felt hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, Lisa felt light, not the suffocating weight of fear and despair, but the true relief that came with knowing she was no longer trapped in the house's grasp. She stood in the void, the remnants of darkness fading away, like the last echoes of a nightmare. There was no more hunger pressing against her chest, no more voices gnawing at the edges of her mind. The world was still, calm, and, for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like she could finally breathe. But even in this calm, something nagged at the back of her mind. A feeling that was both unfamiliar and unsettling. She knew deep down that the battle had not truly been won. The house, the force that had claimed so many before her, was gone, yes. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it had left something behind. The room around her. The void that had once been the epicenter of the house's power began to shift. The edges of the space flickered and distorted like a reflection in a broken mirror. Lisa felt her pulse quicken, the warmth of victory quickly fading as the air around her grew heavy again. Something was wrong. She wasn't alone. From the corners of the void, dark tendrils began to writhe, pulling themselves together like smoke gathering in the shape of a figure. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest as the shadows coalesced, forming a dark silhouette, a familiar, towering presence that loomed over her. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse with dread. It couldn't be. The house had died. It had been destroyed. She had won. But this was something different. This wasn't the house. It wasn't the entity she had fought to escape. This was something older, something more ancient. The shadowy figure stepped forward, its form still a swirling mass of darkness. But this time, its eyes burned with an eerie, otherworldly light, pale and cold like the glow of a distant star. "You think you've won." The voice that spoke was deep, ancient. The same voice that had echoed through the walls of the house. But now it carried a weight, a depth that sent shivers down her spine. It was the voice of the darkness, of everything that had come before her. "You are mistaken, Lisa." Lisa staggered backward, her eyes wide with disbelief, her chest tightening with panic. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "I am not the house," the figure continued, its voice thick with power. "The house was merely my shell, a vessel to contain what I am. You destroyed it. But the house was not the source of the power you fear. You are." Lisa felt a chill run through her, as though something deep within her, something buried for so long, was awakening. The light she had felt, the warmth, began to fade as if it were being consumed by the growing shadow. She was the heir. She had always been the heir. The bloodline that had been tied to the house, tied to it. The figure's form solidified, no longer a shadow, but something almost human, standing tall and proud, cloaked in black. Its eyes blazed with an unnatural fire, and its smile was wide, sharp, full of knowing. "Your bloodline," it murmured, its voice low and almost tender, "was never meant to be free." Lisa's heart beat faster, her breath shallow as the weight of its words settled in. She had been chosen. She had been born for this moment. But not in the way she thought. The house had never been her prison. It was a prison for the darkness that had been in her all along. "No," Lisa whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm not like you." "I'm not. You are like me." The figure interrupted, its tone now one of finality. "I have always been a part of you. From the moment you were born, the moment your blood touched this land, you belonged to me. You were my vessel. And now you are my true heir." The shadows around her revved as if they were alive, responding to its voice. Lisa could feel it now, deep within her. Something ancient stirring. Something primal, a part of her that she had tried to push away. A part of her that had been awakened when the house's power had flowed through her. The figure reached out a hand, long and cold, with fingers like claws, and Lisa felt the pull. Stronger than before, stronger than anything she had ever known. She was fighting it. She had to fight it. "No," she cried, shaking her head, her chest heaving. "I'm not your heir. I won't be." But the figure only smiled, its eyes burning brighter. "You already are." The darkness pressed in on her from all sides, but Lisa could feel it now. The battle was not just between her and the house. It was between her own soul and the thing that had always been lurking in the shadows. The house had tried to claim her, but it wasn't the house that was dangerous. It was what the house had protected, what had been waiting inside her all along. "You are me." The figure's voice echoed, and the words became like a mantra, reverberating through her mind. "Embrace it. Let it consume you. You were never meant to escape. You were born to rule." Lisa felt the darkness closing in, felt the shadows trying to drag her down, to force her into submission, but there was a spark inside her. A resistance, a defiance that had been born in the very moment she rejected the house's grip. "No," she screamed, her voice breaking the oppressive silence. And in that instant, the house, the figure, hesitated. She took a step back, then another, and as she did, the light inside her flared, stronger than ever. She had felt its warmth, its power, and now she knew what it was. It wasn't the house's power, it was hers. In one final act of defiance, she raised her hands, and the light within her exploded outward. A surge of brilliance that pierced through the shadows, cutting through the very heart of the darkness. The figure screamed, "No," howled, as the light enveloped it, consumed it. The shadows splintered, breaking apart, dissolving into nothingness, as the overwhelming presence that had haunted her for so long began to fade. And just as it had come, the darkness was gone. Lisa collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving with exhaustion. The room around her, once filled with malevolent power, was now empty, the air still and quiet. She had fought the darkness within her, and for the first time she felt it, she had won. But even as the light began to fade, she knew this battle was only the beginning. There was power in her blood, a power that would never be extinguished. And while the darkness was gone for now, Lisa understood that she would always carry a part of it with her. But now, she was in control. The house, the shadows, the legacy. They had tried to break her, but she had chosen to rise. And no matter what came next, Lisa knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would never let them win. Not again. Lisa stood in the quiet aftermath, her body still trembling. But her mind was clearer than it had ever been. The light that had been within her, the force she had summoned from deep inside, slowly faded, leaving only a soft glow lingering at the edges of her consciousness. The weight of what had just happened, the battle, the darkness, the overwhelming pull, was still heavy on her heart, but it was different now. The struggle was over, or so she thought. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the full extent of her power, the power she had always had, but had never fully understood. She had been born for this moment, this battle. The house, the shadowy figure, the legacy, it had all led to this point, and in that moment, Lisa knew what she had to do. The figure, the darkness, was gone. It had vanished into the light she had summoned, its scream fading into nothing. She had destroyed it. She had chosen to destroy it. And yet, there was a lingering presence, a whisper deep within her, one she couldn't quite place. The ground beneath her seemed to tremble, not in fear, but in anticipation. As if something else, something greater, was stirring. Her breath quickened. Was it over? Had the house truly been destroyed? But then she heard it, the faintest sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was a feeling, a pull that surged deep inside her, one that wasn't rooted in the past, but in the present. The darkness was gone, but it had left behind something. It was still here, in her. A slow realization began to form. The house, the figure, the entity that had fed on her family for generations. It wasn't merely a physical presence. It was a force, a part of something far more ancient, something that didn't need a house to thrive. It had moved through her, transformed her, made her its vessel. And now, it was waiting to return, not as a house, not as an entity with shape and form, but as something far more dangerous, a part of her. A cold wind swept through the stillness, the air turning sharp. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as a deep, guttural voice whispered from within her mind. "It's not over, Lisa." The voice wasn't the figure's. It wasn't a man's or a woman's. It was hers, but twisted, like it had always been a part of her, buried deep, never fully realized. "You can't escape me. You can't escape yourself." Her hands clenched into fists, her pulse racing as the realization hit her with full force. She hadn't just fought the house. She had fought a part of herself. The darkness, the entity. It had always been hers, passed down through her bloodline. It had shaped her, guided her, fed on her fear, and now it was claiming its final victory. "No," Lisa whispered fiercely, shaking her head, trying to deny it. She wasn't like the others. She couldn't be. But the whispers continued, low and insistent. "You're just like me. You always have been." The ground beneath her seemed to shift, and the familiar hum of dark power grew louder, stronger. It was the house that wasn't gone, the house that had been inside her all along. Lisa staggered back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could feel it now. The power inside her was a torrent, a force that she couldn't control, that she hadn't known existed until now. She was not like her ancestors. She wasn't a victim, a prisoner. She was stronger than that. The whispers rose, growing louder. "You can't fight me, Lisa. You can never escape me. The house is you." With a surge of energy, Lisa raised her hands, the light inside her flaring once more, but it wasn't the same light as before. It was darker, more potent, fed by the very power she had fought so hard to contain. She had been running from it, trying to escape the darkness, but now she understood. She couldn't hide from herself. She couldn't escape the blood that flowed through her veins. This wasn't just about defeating the house. It was about mastering the darkness inside her, taking control of it, wielding it as her own. The shadows writhed, twisting into shapes that mocked her. But Lisa stood tall, her eyes glowing with an intensity she had never felt before. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was its master. "I am not you," she said, her voice strong, unwavering. "I choose what I become. You won't control me anymore." The ground trembled again, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with power. Lisa's hands shot forward, the light inside her surging. The darkness writhed, but this time it wasn't fighting her. It was submitting. It was yielding to her will. The figure, the shadow, screamed in fury, but it was fading, dissolving into the air as Lisa willed it. She wasn't just releasing herself from its grip, she was transforming it, reshaping it into something new, something her own. The power, the darkness, slowly dissolved around her, but Lisa knew it would never truly disappear. It was a part of her now. And for the first time, she understood that. She wasn't just the air, she was the keeper. The room fell silent. The air around her was still, heavy with the aftermath of the battle she had fought, not just against the house, but against herself. She had won. But the power that had once threatened to consume her was now hers to command. And she knew, deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning. Lisa closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, letting the weight of her choice settle in. She wasn't free of the house, not completely. But she was free to choose what she did with the darkness now. She could use it, control it, turn it into something that served her. The power was hers, and now she would decide what it would become. The future was uncertain, but Lisa no longer feared it. She was no longer running from the house. She was the house. And whatever came next, she would face it on her terms. The silence lingered for what felt like an eternity. Lisa stood in the void, the weight of her decision settling heavily upon her. The house, the darkness, the power. It was all hers now, a part of her. She could feel it, like a pulse in her veins, a rhythm that matched the beat of her heart. It was no longer something that controlled her, it was something she controlled. The shadows, the whispers, they weren't enemies anymore, they were tools. She was the master, and they were her servants. But with that power came responsibility. The knowledge that she could never go back to who she was, that the person she had been, afraid, fragile, desperate to escape, was gone. In her place stood something stronger, something unyielding. The dark legacy of her bloodline had been passed to her, but now she had to decide what to do with it. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the air around her, still thick with that ancient power. The house was no longer a haunted structure. It was a living entity, a force she had absorbed, integrated into her very essence. Her family's bloodline had always been tied to it, and now she understood. They had been the caretakers, the keepers of the house, and she was its final inheritor. She would not run from it. She would make it hers. But in doing so, she needed to set the rules. A distant sound broke the silence, like a door creaking open. Lisa turned her head toward the source of the noise. The walls around her, once empty and vast, now seemed to breathe. They pulsed with the energy she had just wielded, but there was something new. A feeling, distant but familiar, like a presence just beyond the edge of her awareness. She stepped forward, her feet soundless on the floor, moving toward the door she hadn't seen before. It was narrow, hidden in the shadows, but she knew instinctively that it was there for her. The door was an invitation, an open path into the unknown, a test of what she would become. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the door handle, and it turned easily under her touch. The door creaked open, revealing what lay beyond. At first, it was a blur, a soft, white light that seemed to emanate from the room beyond, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw it. It was not a room at all. It was an expanse, an endless stretch of darkness, punctuated by what looked like glowing stars in the distance. But they were not stars. They were doors. Endless doors, stretching out into infinity, each one different from the others. Some were weathered, aged, their wood darkened with time. Others were pristine, untouched by the years. Some were small, others towering above her, their surfaces smooth and reflecting a faint light. Each door called to her in its own way, whispering secrets and promises of what lay behind. Lisa stood at the threshold, feeling the pull of them, knowing that each one held a part of her destiny. Some of them led to places she might have seen in her nightmares, others to places where the light of hope shone bright, blinding in its clarity. Each of them was a potential future, a path that would lead her to something greater than she could comprehend. She stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the endless rows of doors, each one beckoning her with its quiet, persistent hum. The air was thick with the weight of choices that she could not yet fully understand, choices that would shape her future. And then she realized this is it, the moment she had been preparing for her entire life. Not just the battle against the house, but the battle against herself. The house had been a tool, a reflection of her fears, but now she was beyond it. Now she was the keeper of her own fate. The darkness, the power, it was hers to command, to shape, and to wield. No more fear. No more running. Her gaze turned toward one door in particular, a tall, imposing structure with ancient carvings on its surface. The door was simple, yet somehow it felt right. It called to her like none of the others. It was not a door to fear. It was the door to her future. Lisa took a step forward, then another, each one feeling more certain than the last. She reached for the door handle, her fingers brushing against the cool metal, and without hesitation, she turned it. The door opened, and in the instant it did, she felt something shift within her. The weight of everything, the house, the darkness, the legacy, lifted off her shoulders. She wasn't just accepting her fate anymore. She was defining it. Beyond the door, there was only light. Warm, golden light that wrapped around her like a cloak, pulling her forward. The room on the other side was not just a space, it was a new beginning. And she realized, with a clarity she had never known before, that the true house she had inherited wasn't just the darkness. It was her own soul. She was now the keeper of something far more powerful than she had ever imagined, and this was where she would begin. The whispers faded, the shadows dissolved. The house and everything it had represented faded into the past. Lisa stepped forward, leaving the darkness behind and into the light that was waiting for her. Her journey was far from over, but it was hers now. It always had been. And with that, the door closed behind her, and the world was hers to shape. As the door clicked shut behind Lisa, the last remnants of the house, the darkness that had tormented her for so long faded into the past. She was no longer the frightened woman who had once felt trapped by her lineage, by the twisted power coursing through her veins. She was free, not because she had escaped, but because she had embraced what she had become. The light enveloped her, warm and welcoming, like the first rays of dawn after a long, oppressive night. It was the light of new beginnings, of self-realization. Lisa wasn't just the heir to a haunted house anymore. She was the architect of her own destiny. She understood now that the power she had inherited was not a curse, but a gift. A gift she could choose to wield, not to be controlled by. With each step forward, the path ahead became clearer, her purpose more defined. The doors that stretched before her weren't just possibilities, they were opportunities. Each one represented a choice, a chance to shape the future she wanted, to define what she would become. And Lisa knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never allow the darkness to claim her again. She had chosen to rise above it, to take the power that had once threatened to consume her and make it her own. And as she walked forward into the light, she felt no fear, only the excitement of what was to come. The world was vast, and Lisa was ready to face it. Her journey was just beginning, but this time she would face it on her terms. She was no longer bound to the past, to the house, or to the shadows that had once held her captive. She was free, and for the first time in her life, she knew that the future was hers to create.